In the 1990s, Martin became one of the most recognizable shows on television. Martin Lawrence turned everyday life into comedy, filling the show with bold characters, rapid-fire jokes, and a romance that anchored the chaos. The show captured the energy of young Black life, and its influence stretched far beyond television. But underneath all the laughter, Martin also revealed something much deeper. It showed what happens when Black men are denied the freedom to be vulnerable. Martin Payne was quick with a joke, sharp in every exchange, and always confident. Yet he rarely showed fear, sadness, or tenderness. Even his love for Gina often came through in exaggerated gestures instead of real honesty. In this video, we're going to break down how the show Martin exposes the unspoken limits society has placed on Black masculinity. Before we get into it, don't forget to hit subscribe if you want more breakdowns of Black representation in media and the shows that carry hidden truths beneath the entertainment. Now, let's get into it. When Martin first aired in 1992, it quickly became clear that humor was going to be its engine. Martin Payne was the kind of character who could not let a moment pass without twisting it into something funny. He joked about Pam's appearance, poked at Cole's gullibility, and even turned tender exchanges with Gina into playful banter. His rhythm was relentless, and the audience rewarded him with laughter. It was a brand of comedy that set the show apart from many others of its era. What made this pattern more interesting was how comedy worked as Martin's defense. Every time the character was backed into a corner or faced with the possibility of exposing real emotion, he found a way to laugh his way out of it. If he felt jealous, he exaggerated it until it became a gag. If he felt nervous, he performed confidence so loudly that no one could see through it. When situations might have required honesty, he spun them into routines. This made him entertaining, but it also made him difficult to read as a full person. Humor has always been more than entertainment in Black culture. For generations, it has been a way to deal with pressure, hardship, and the constant weight of racism. Laughter gave people relief, but it also created a mask. Martin Payne carried that history. His constant jokes looked like confidence, but they also functioned as armor. By never letting anyone see what was under the surface, he protected himself from judgment and kept control of the moment. This shield of comedy shaped every relationship on the show. Gina loved him, but she often had to fight through layers of jokes to get to anything real. His friends were loyal, but their bond was built on banter instead of trust that could withstand serious conversations. Even with Pam, their arguments became a running joke instead of an opportunity for genuine dialogue. In every dynamic, Martin relied on humor to keep his true emotions hidden. For audiences, this approach was both familiar and limiting. Many viewers recognized the instinct to mask discomfort with jokes because they had seen it in real life. Others simply enjoyed the comedy without questioning what was missing. But the absence of consistent vulnerability created a narrow version of Black manhood. Martin Payne could be clever, stylish, and quick on his feet, but he was rarely allowed to be uncertain or tender. That gap was as much a part of the character as his catchphrases. The mask of comedy gave Martin his power, but it also exposed his limits. He was fully realized as a source of laughter, yet incomplete as a man who could show the range of human emotions. That imbalance made the show funny, but it also revealed the unspoken rules of masculinity at the time. In Martin, comedy wasn't just a performance. It was protection, and protection came at the cost of openness. Now, to understand why Martin Payne struggled with vulnerability, it helps to look at the larger picture of how masculinity has been shaped for Black men in America. Television has long sent clear messages about what kind of man is acceptable. Strength is rewarded, humor is celebrated, and control is admired. What often gets left out is the freedom to be emotionally open. In Martin, this pressure showed up in the way the character interacted with the people closest to him. With Gina, his girlfriend and later wife, his love was obvious, but the way he expressed it rarely left space for tenderness. Instead of quiet words of reassurance, his affection was loud. When arguments broke out, he relied on raising his voice or twisting the moment into comedy. His feelings were real, but The form they took was often exaggerated because the character did not know how to show them plainly. This wasn't an accident. The show was molded by a culture that often viewed softness in men as weakness, and in black men as dangerous or undesirable. For centuries, stereotypes painted black men as aggressive or threatening, and those images carried into the 20th century. In response, new portrayals tried to correct the narrative, but instead of embracing full humanity, they leaned into a different extreme. Black men were shown as strong, confident, and funny, but still closed off emotionally. It was a new image, but it carried the same limitation. Martin Payne embodied that limitation. He could entertain his friends for hours. He could dominate a room with charisma. But when it came to admitting fear, sadness, or insecurity, the tools weren't there. The writers gave him personality in abundance, but stopped short of giving him emotional depth. For many viewers, that absence felt normal because it reflected what they had already seen in their own lives. Men were expected to hold things in. They could express frustration, but not fragility. This pressure has consequences. When vulnerability is denied, communication in relationships suffers. Conflicts escalate instead of being resolved. Love gets expressed through performance rather than openness. On Martin, that pattern played out again and again. Arguments with Gina became shouting matches. Disagreements with friends turned into ridicule. The character never learned another way to respond because the role of the vulnerable black man had not yet been accepted on mainstream television. Looking back, the show captured a moment in time when masculinity was defined through limits rather than possibilities. Martin Payne was celebrated for his energy, his humor, and his confidence. But he was also trapped by a script that left no room for vulnerability. That contradiction made him a compelling character, but it also made him incomplete. And that incompleteness reflects the broader struggle many black men have faced in trying to live up to an image of strength that leaves little space for anything else. At the heart of Martin was the relationship between Martin Payne and Gina Waters. They were young, ambitious, and deeply connected. Their romance gave the show its center, offering moments of stability in the middle of all the chaos and comedy. Yet their relationship also revealed how little space there was for softness when it came to Martin's character. Gina was portrayed as caring and supportive, often the grounding force in Martin's life. She was allowed to express frustration, disappointment, and affection without restraint. Her emotional honesty gave her character depth and made her relatable to audiences. Martin, on the other hand, often stumbled when faced with moments that required openness. His love for Gina was clear, but he struggled to show it in ways that felt vulnerable. Instead, he relied on grand gestures, over-the-top humor, or heated arguments. This imbalance created a dynamic that mirrored real life for many viewers. Black women have often carried the emotional weight of relationships, while black men have been expected to remain guarded. The show reinforced that divide. Gina could cry, plead, or confess her feelings. Martin had to mask his with jokes or dominance. When he did express vulnerability, it was fleeting, and the moment quickly shifted back to laughter or conflict. One example can be seen in the episodes leading up to their engagement. Gina's commitment to Martin was unquestioned, but she often pushed for clarity in their future. Instead of addressing her concerns with honesty, Martin would deflect. He teased her, he argued, or he brushed it off until circumstances forced him to act. What could have been an opportunity for deep emotional exchange became another scene built on comedy. This mattered because it set the tone for how audiences saw black love on screen. The relationship was aspirational in many ways. They were stylish, successful, and passionately devoted to each other. But the lack of consistent softness from Martin left the impression that black men could only show love through intensity or humor, not through simple vulnerability. That portrayal carried weight, shaping how people thought about what love between black men and women should look like.
Even in friendships, Martin's lack of openness was evident. With Tommy and Cole, he was the leader, always cracking jokes at their expense. Rarely did the friendship allow him to drop the act and share genuine concern or fear. Their bond was real, but it was built on banter rather than emotional honesty. The same pattern showed up with Pam, though their dynamic leaned even more into ridicule and conflict. What stands out looking back is how much the absence of softness became the norm. Audiences accepted that Martin could be funny, angry, or romantic in a performative way, but they never expected him to be truly vulnerable. The show gave the impression that vulnerability was optional, even unnecessary, for Black men in relationships. That message, repeated week after week, left a cultural mark that still lingers. The pattern of emotional imbalance in Martin's relationships points to a larger truth. His vulnerability was defined more by its absence than by its presence. Where Gina's character could express tenderness and frustration openly, Martin's character avoided those spaces, and the lack became just as powerful as anything he actually said or did. When a television character consistently avoids a certain behavior, it draws attention in its own way. Viewers might not have named it, but they felt it. Martin's refusal to show fear, sadness, or insecurity stood out because audiences rarely saw him step outside of his comedic armor. His laughter filled the room, but the silence on deeper emotions said just as much about who he was. There were rare moments when Martin allowed a glimpse of something softer. Sometimes it appeared in brief scenes with Gina, often right before humor swept it away. On other occasions, it surfaced when his friendships were tested. Yet the writers treated those moments as unusual, even disruptive to the tone of the show. They were exceptions, not part of the regular rhythm. The very rarity of those scenes made them memorable, but it also reinforced the idea that vulnerability for Black men was not natural or expected. This absence mattered because television does more than entertain. It normalizes what audiences should anticipate from certain groups of people. By building a character who avoided vulnerability almost entirely, Martin contributed to a long tradition of media where Black men were not shown as fully human. They could be funny, attractive, stylish, and ambitious, but they were not supposed to be emotionally open. The gap between what was shown and what was withheld became part of the message. For younger viewers, this created a subtle kind of lesson. Many could laugh along with Martin's antics and never question why his softer side remained hidden. Others, especially those who recognized the same patterns in their own families or communities, may have felt the absence more directly. They saw in Martin the men around them who carried pressure to appear strong at all times, no matter the personal cost.
Man to show weakness without losing his identity. Instead, Martin Payne's identity depended on never letting that weakness surface. It was a character choice that mirrored a social reality, one where vulnerability was not only discouraged, but almost invisible. As the seasons went on, this absence became part of the show's fabric. Viewers expected Martin to crack jokes, explode in anger, or perform love through spectacle. They did not expect him to simply sit in his feelings. That expectation, shaped by repetition and reinforced by culture, revealed a truth larger than any single episode. Vulnerability was missing, and the absence itself told the story. And this absence of vulnerability on Martin was not just about one character. It became part of the cultural footprint the show left behind. Millions of people watched each week, and what they saw helped shape expectations about how Black men should behave. The influence went far beyond jokes and catchphrases. Martin became one of the defining sitcoms of the 1990s. Its style, slang, and energy reached into music, fashion, and comedy for years to come. The characters played by Martin Lawrence, from Shanae to Jerome, entered the cultural lexicon. But the most lasting influence came from Martin Payne himself. He embodied a version of Black manhood that was dominant, funny, and clever, but not emotionally open. That version stuck in people's minds because it was reinforced week after week. Other shows of the time approached masculinity differently. The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air allowed moments where Will Smith's character broke down, especially in episodes dealing with his father or issues of belonging. Audiences still talk about those scenes because they stood out in a television landscape that rarely allowed such openness. A Different World gave its male characters more room to show care and tenderness,
especially in romantic relationships. By comparison, Martin kept those doors mostly closed. Its refusal to let vulnerability be part of the story made it distinct, but it also made it limiting. The cultural impact didn't stop with television. Viewers took these portrayals into their own ideas about relationships, friendships, and family. The idea that a black man should be funny, confident, and strong, but not soft, became normalized. This wasn't only about entertainment, it was about identity. Media plays a role in how people see themselves, and Martin's influence shaped expectations for a generation. The absence of vulnerability also affected how black love was depicted. Martin and Gina's relationship was aspirational in many ways. They were both working professionals, building a life together, navigating conflicts while staying committed. But the lack of emotional balance made their love story incomplete. Audiences saw passion, style, and loyalty, but rarely saw the quiet moments of honesty that sustain real relationships. The cultural message was clear. Black love could thrive without vulnerability.